Disclaimer. ChatGPT is simply a tool for gathering information. It is not the source of all truth, nor should anyone treat it as such. If a person wants to learn something, the most accurate way is to do the hard work for themselves. That being said, this podcast utilizes ChatGPT as an overall aim to stir conversation and promote independent investigation, starting with the Word of God, aka the Bible.
Blow it up till they throwing up, ride till they die. If the drummer pop off, then it's eye for an eye. Even the blind see a ribbon in the sky. Stevie Wonder told the world, I'm just trying to tell them why. We only got one life, two roads, you decide. Man, I'm trying to put you on to what your money can't buy. Hold up, slow it up, stop living that lie. When it's all said and done, don't be surprised. Know that Jesus is alive, yeah, and he's coming back shortly. $1 Million beach house, heat game, court seats, true religion.
One of the things I learned in life as I continued my walk with the Lord was that as you continue growing with him and walking with him in the knowledge of God and knowing who he is, new things will happen to you that will fascinate you, whether that be personal experiences or people that you meet or stories that you hear. And the story I'm going to tell you today is a story that actually changed my whole paradigm about how God works. The story is about Desmond Doss, and it's a classic example of this. Just for you to get a little background, I love war history. I'm just a history buff. And honestly, a lot of the stuff that has happened in the past has to do with war. And my favorite war that I like to look at is World War II. Now, one thing about World War II, though, is there's different people who have become heroes in the faith when it comes to Christianity, you know, because obviously there was a lot of bloodshed, a lot of fighting, and Jesus doesn't like fighting, right? But within that, there are people who actually stand out. And some people you can think about are Dietrich Bonhoeffer and even Corey ten Boom, you know, and then there's other people. All of these stories you hear, these heroic stories you hear in World War II. But I didn't hear much about Desmond until 2016. And I remember I went to go see Hacksaw Ridge in theaters, which came out that year. And after I watched the movie, I was actually blown away. I was blown away by the man's history, the man's story, especially since I can relate to his faith to some degree. But one thing that also happened to me is that I left with this kind of a dark feeling about how terrible war really is. And it made me question exactly what is an honorable man? How would God describe such a man as compared to, you know, what's going on in the World Wide Web, you know, whatever people are saying, like ChatGPT, for instance. So I wanted to tackle the question in ChatGPT to figure out, when it comes to honor in Desmond Doss, did people consider to him to be an honorable man? And so I asked the question for ChatGPT, who was Desmond Doss, to start off with, which we'll always do. Who was Desmond Doss? And this is what ChatGPT said.
Desmond Doss was a United States Army medic and the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award. He became famous for his heroism during World War II, particularly at the Battle of Okinawa in 1945. Born on February 7th, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia, he was a Seventh-day Adventist who became a World War II combat medic in the 77th Infantry Division. He was a conscientious objector who refused to carry a weapon or kill based on his religious beliefs, but still chose to serve in the military. During the Battle of Okinawa, Doss risked his life repeatedly to save about 75 wounded soldiers. Under constant enemy fire, he lowered them one by one down a cliff face, known as Hacksaw Ridge, using a rope and a sling, all without carrying a gun. He received a Medal of Honor, awarded by President Harry Truman in 1945. His story was told in books and documentaries, but most famously in the 2016 film Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson, where he was portrayed by actor Andrew Garfield. He is remembered as a hero of faith, courage, and unwavering moral conviction.
So what is a conscientious objector? Well, I'm going to read you straight from the manual of the Army regulations what exactly a conscientious objector is. A conscientious objector, according to Army Regulations 643, it's a firm, fixed, and sincere objection to participation in war in any form or the bearing of arms because of religious training and belief. Now, that's what Desmond Doss was. He was a conscientious objector. Now, thanks to the U.S. Constitution, we have rights in America. Individuals' religious belief are respected for the most part, and largely accommodated, even in the military, because that's what they're fighting for. They're fighting for freedom. So this includes those like Das, who believed that it was wrong to take a life. Now, he was really more extreme. He was more extreme in not wanting to even touch a weapon. That's how serious Das was about it. So instead of combat roles, conscientious objector assignments are like generally like people who want to be in non-combatant roles. It could be army hospitals, cooking, supply transportation. I believe my grandfather was in he was also in World War II, and he just transported supplies back and forth and whatnot. He was behind the front lines. I wouldn't say he was a conscientious objector, but that's what I'm talking about. They don't really fight in the actual army like the people on the front lines. For Das, though, he was different. Das enlisted, which was actually bold in itself, since one would think that conscious objectors wouldn't even want to enlist in the army or whatever to even get close to a weapon. But for Desmond Doss, he really felt the need to sign up and help his country out during a dire situation, World War II. And it was a time of world crisis. You had Germany expanding, you had Japan attacking people in America. And so it was a very, very serious situation. Desmond, though, decided to sign up himself. However, he had one problem, and that was his conscientious objection. And in the military, they needed as much men as they can get. Okay, so you had the draftees. You had people who were drafted who didn't really want to fight, but they actually were forced to. But then you got Desmond Doss, who enlisted. And that's what really stands out to me first about Desmond, is that he volunteered. He volunteered to do this. To me, that's a courageous move to make. He wasn't drafted. He wanted to be in combat. He wanted to be in combat with the sole desire of helping people get better as a medical and as a person with medical knowledge. So, but again, the issue he had was the weapons and the fighting. So he decided, I'm going to enlist. I want to help people on the battlefield, but I don't want to carry a gun. And that was just unheard of back then. So what was his reasoning for this? I know it had to do with his religion. And I know one thing about his faith. He was a Seventh-day Adventist. Now, a Seventh-day Adventist, a deep study into the religion is actually beyond the scope of this episode. There's a lot of things that I can say about it. However, I would just say some brief facts about them for now. And I'll give you my final judgment on his life at the end of the episode. One of the biggest things, as you can probably tell by their name, Seventh-day Adventists, they really hold the Sabbath day to be Saturday, and they take it very, very seriously. They firmly believe the Sabbath day is on Saturday, and what the Sabbath day is a day of rest commanded by the Lord in the Bible to the Jews, and that means no work at all. For them, for the Seventh-day Adventists, this means work at all should be done between sunset Friday through sunset Saturday. So instead of working, the day is used for like fellowship, for prayer, for Bible studies and whatnot, going on walks, enjoying nature, but nothing to do with like building fires or drills, in the army, or things like that. No, they take a rest that day. How does Desmond Doss do it in the military? Well, it's very interesting. For Doss, he would avoid military routine activities such as drills or chores on Saturdays. He agreed to perform extra duties on the other days to make up for the Saturday that he didn't decide to do anything because of his religion. There was one exception that Doss made for working during the Sabbath on a Saturday, and that was the deception of saving a life. He called it an act of mercy, since Jesus did so on the Sabbath. Not supposed to work. So he felt that acts of mercy were okay to do during the Sabbath day. And he said, quote, "I will work on the Sabbath if it's to save life, because that's what Jesus did." So that was his reasoning for being able to fight on Saturday, because obviously the war doesn't pause for Desmond Doss. It keeps going every single day. So if a battle was on a Sabbath day, he joined the squad. He joined the squad with the mindset of saving a life. And therefore, in his mind, he wouldn't be violating that commandment. Needless to say, he received much resentment from his division for not working when everyone else was. That's understandable. Like, who is this guy sitting out doing drill and we're running miles and doing push-ups and he can't even do that? So it was a very, very hard time for him early on in the military. The second thing about Seventh-day Adventists that you should know is they are very focused on their health and eating healthy and healthy living, period. SDAs, or Seventh-day Adventists, I'll just call them SDAs from this point on. SDAs, they avoid meat that's considered to be unclean in the Old Testament, such as pork and shellfish. They also abstain from tobacco and alcohol. Doss, however, he avoided all meat whatsoever. He was a vegetarian. So, for him, he's not all about eating anything that's living, besides plants. Now, he was also a partial pacifist. So what does that mean? The third thing about SDAs you got to understand is they are partial pacifists. So the primary influencer of the religion of Seventh-day Adventists was arguably the founder, Ellen G. White. And many SDAs leaned toward pacifism because of her writings and her teachings. But mainly she was nonviolent. She was nonviolent and did not like to fight at all. And so people who were influenced by her in the SDAs felt it was good to not be violent, just like she said, and also to have a conscientious objection to any type of fight in the military. However, everybody's degrees were different when it came to practicing pacifism. In other words, what I mean by that is the official doctrine of the religion itself, there wasn't really a hard line stance. It was left open to individual conscience. For Doss, the sixth commandment, which is thou shalt not kill or murder, meant not even touching a weapon. Now, Doss had a brother, his brother Harold. Harold was also in the military at the time. He was in the Navy. However, he wasn't as extreme as Desmond was. And, he actually fought in the Navy and carried weapons. But his story, as we get more into this episode, you're going to see it just blows your mind. If you haven't seen Hacksaw Ridge, I encourage you to watch it. It's very accurate to almost a T. There's a couple of things that are off, but I will get to that in a second. But I really want to know from ChatGPT what really happened. Like, one thing about Mel Gibson movies, who made Hacksaw Ridge, he's known for his graphic portrayals of stuff. Like The Patriot, Braveheart, even The Passion of the Christ. Now, I think Passion of the Christ, side note, was very accurate because it says he was beaten beyond recognition. And that movie was I could do a whole episode on that. But anyway, but that's Mel Gibson. And Mel Gibson's all about action. He's all about getting people into the movie to the extreme. So I really want to know from ChatGPT actually, what really happened. Hacksaw Ridge is a very bloody film. It really is. And the military, and the war is actually pretty bloody. And I'm sure everybody would agree with that. But it was really bloody. Yet in the film, it seems to be like this Superman type of character. Somehow he's not getting shot. He's dodging these bullets and he's saving all these people's lives. And I'm thinking, like, is this over the top? Did this really happen? No. So it was very interesting as I was watching this. Like, this can't be real. How is this a true story? I want to know exactly how did Desmond receive the Medal of Honor as the thing said. How did he receive this medal? And so I asked ChatGPT this question: how did Desmond receive the Medal of Honor? And this is what it said.
On October 12th, 1945, President Harry S. Truman awarded Desmond the Medal of Honor for his heroics at the Maeda Escarpment, also known as Hacksaw Ridge, in Okinawa, Japan, between April 29th and May 21st. Of 1945. Here are some excerpts from the official citation. On April 29th, 1945, Doss's unit, the 1st Battalion, 307th Infantry, assaults the 400-foot escarpment. As intense enemy fire rains down, nearly 75 men are wounded and trapped on top of the ridge. Doss remains behind alone, under constant fire. He carries each wounded soldier to the edge of the cliff and lowers them down one by one using a rope sling system. Estimated, he saved 75 men in one night. Even Doss wasn't sure. He prayed, "Lord, help me get one more."
One more. Yeah, we get one more.
On May 2nd, Doss rescues a severely wounded soldier 200 yards ahead of friendly lines. He runs through open ground under heavy rifle and mortar fire and drags the man back to safety and treats him. 2 days later, 4 soldiers are injured near a heavily fortified Japanese cave. Doss crawls within 8 yards of the enemy to reach them. Despite grenades raining down, he dresses each man's wounds, then makes 4 trips through gunfire to carry them out one by one. On May 5th, Doss aids a wounded artillery officer under intense shelling and small arms fire. He treats the officer, moves him to cover, and administers plasma under fire. Later that day, he rescues another soldier hit near a cave. Crawling forward under enemy fire, he treats and carries him 100 yards to safety. Later on May 21st, during a night attack near Shuri, Doss stays in an exposed position, giving aid, while others take cover. He is seriously wounded in both legs by a grenade blast. He refuses to call a medic to avoid endangering anyone else. After 5 hours, litter bearers reach him. On the way back, they're caught in a tank barrage. Doss sees another man more severely wounded and gives up his place on the stretcher. While waiting again, he is hit a second time, suffering a compound fracture in his arm. He splints his own arm with a rifle stock and crawls 300 yards to safety. The end of the Medal of Honor citation reads, "Through his outstanding bravery and unflinching determination in the face of desperately dangerous conditions, Doss saved the lives of many soldiers." His name became a symbol throughout the 77th Infantry Division for outstanding gallantry, far above and beyond the call of duty.
According to the U.S. Department of Defense, the nation's highest military award for valor is the Medal of Honor presented by the President in Congress's name. By law, only U.S. service members who distinguish themselves through conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty can receive this medal. So apparently, the U.S. military believed it was fit for Desmond to receive that medal. And it's very interesting, all of the feats that he did. It was amazing. In other words, receiving the Medal of Honor actually meant that you were among the bravest soldiers to have ever served in the military. It's administered by the president himself. Okay. Now let's look at his heroic acts for a minute. You know, as I was doing this research, I'm like, this gets crazy to me. And just looking at the citation alone for why he received it, my mind is blown. Like, what first sticks out to me is that his moment of significance began on a day before Hitler committed suicide. Why is this important? Well, obviously he wasn't fighting Germans. He was fighting Japanese. But to have that in a U.S. soldier's mind that Hitler died would certainly have been a morale boost for sure. But we can rule that out from him because Hitler wasn't even dead yet before he started doing his heroics at Hacksaw Ridge. Secondly, it says he remained behind alone while the others retreated, and this is under constant fire. Somehow he manages to carry not 1, not 10, not even 30, but 75 wounded soldiers, one by one, to the cliff's edge without getting a scratch. And each time he prayed that prayer, it seems like God answered it. And I found an article that supports this event occurring. Check it out. Thirdly, him running through open ground under heavy fire and mortar fire was ridiculous because the Japanese, one thing about Japanese, they were notoriously known for killing medics. They were ruthless people. They did not care. They would even give their lives for their country. Literally. Suicidal charges, banzai charges, kamikaze planes. These people were very serious when it came to fighting. And so by killing the medics, what they were doing, they were demoralizing the enemy. That was the point. Because if there's no medics, that means if you get shot, no one can help you. No one can stop your bleeding. No one can help you survive when you get shot or get blown up in certain spots. So it was very demoralizing for the enemy when the medics would do that, or when the Japanese would do that. Fourthly, the wounded artillery officer that the ChatGPT mentioned, his name was Captain Jack Glover. He's actually in Hacksaw Ridge, not him himself, but somebody plays him, and he somehow did administer plasma under fire. That takes time and a lot of guts. You got to hook up the plasma. You got to hook it up into their vein. I mean, how are you doing this when you're getting shot at? Grenades probably thrown at you, and artillery shells. It's crazy to me. And fifthly, he refuses a medic for himself when he's finally hurt because he didn't want them hurt in the process. Then he gives up his stretcher for another wounded man and instead crawls 300 yards while injured back to safety. That's not even in the movie, Hacksaw Ridge, to be honest, but that actually happened according to the citation here. I mean, for me, I don't know if that doesn't sound like an over the top movie, then I don't know what it is. I'm telling you, based on his true story, if that doesn't seem over the top, I don't know what it is to me. It blows my mind. Given all of this, though, I truly wondered, what did the others say about him, both before and after the things he did? So I wanted to ask ChatGPT that question. So I asked him, what did the others say about Desmond Doss in the military? And this is what it said.
Fierce fighting continued on the escarpment, didn't it,
Yes,
Fred?
it did, Ralph. I saw Doss repeatedly go out among heavy enemy fire and bring the wounded back to safety. And on May the 2nd, Doss, when I was wounded in the face, you gave me a morphine shot and bandaged my head and led me back to that cargo net.
5 days later, I was wounded very seriously in the left lung and left knee, and Doss was the only medic left at that time. He came down and gave me courage and dressed my wound, gave first aid to the other 3 men that were hit with me. He sent us back, and he remained there under fire. Doss, I owe you my life.
Captain Jack Glover initially opposed Doss. He told him, "You're not going to be by my side if you don't carry a gun." He also told the Army, "I don't want this guy. He's a coward." But later, he stated, "He ended up saving my life. He was one of the bravest persons alive." And then to have him end up saving your life is the irony of the whole thing. Private Ralph Baker said, "He was a skinny little guy. We doubted he could even make it through basic. And he wouldn't touch a rifle. We thought he was just trying to get out of fighting. But I tell you, after Okinawa, not a man in our company would ever say a word against Desmond again. If you were wounded, you wanted Doss coming for you." Sergeant Howell, portrayed by Vince Vaughn in Hacksaw Ridge, said to Doss, "Doss, I didn't know who you were. You did more than any man here, and you did it without a gun." There are also some notable quotes from Desmond himself. On being mocked, he said, "I was ridiculed and called all kinds of names. They just couldn't understand why I didn't want to carry a gun. But I wanted to serve, just in a different way." About staying faithful, he said, "I knew I could never touch a weapon or take a life. But I also knew I could help save lives. So I put my trust in God and I went to war." Regarding Hacksaw Ridge, while everybody else was taking life, I was busy saving it. I just kept praying, Lord, please help me get one more. Asked why he kept going back to save others, Desmond stated, I felt like it was an insult to God to accept the protection of a weapon while doing his work. My strength came from God. He was the one who enabled me to do what I did. I was just a medic doing my job. The real heroes are the ones who didn't come back.
When it comes to Jack Glover, I can really understand his sentiment. I mean, like, think about it. Like, what if there's hand-to-hand combat, right? Or I'm about to get shot by an enemy soldier. Desmond's right there. Okay, he can't touch your weapon now. What's going to happen to me? You know, is he going to do anything at all? You know, my mindset would go, that guy's a coward. Like, he's not going to help. You're not going to help me in a battlefield. I don't want to run with you as I'm fighting the enemy. So I get Jack's sentiment and all of this. Yet I say this though, his assessment was off from the get-go. Why was it off? Because a coward wouldn't want to go into combat without a weapon. I mean, think about it for a second. Like, that should tell you alone that either the guy's crazy or he's just extremely brave. If he says, no, sir, I don't want a weapon. I want to go in the military. I want to go in the military and I want to fight and I want to go on the front lines. I want to be a medic, but I don't want a gun. I mean, either you're crazy or you're extremely brave, but I would never think that you're a coward by that alone. Glover he couldn't understand his faith. That was the problem. He couldn't understand Desmond, you know, so the only thing he had to go back to was maybe he's just a coward. Maybe that's why. So he was trying to figure things out and draw his own conclusions, but obviously he was wrong. Ironically, it seems like God saw it fit to have the same guy that he misjudged save his own life. You know, it sounds a lot like how Jesus died to save those who killed him. You know, so it's just the whole irony about the whole situation was just funny to me. Ralph Baker, I couldn't find a picture of Ralph, but I trust that he was in the story. He's actually in the film. If you catch it, it's very small. But he's in the film, like the actual person who plays Ralph Baker. But it's very hard to find. But if you really pay attention, you'll see him. He's actually one of the injured that Desmond helps out. His comments remind me of someone who told me about how Christians should be in the workplace. Someone close to me once said, you know, when you're in the workplace and you don't know how people are going to receive you and your faith, or maybe you talk to people about Jesus and you shared your faith. Now what? You know, they're not going to get born again. You know, they're still doing their thing. What is your role now? And he told me, well, your role now is to be a fire extinguisher. In other words, even if people take issue with you at your job, be that person, be that guy or that girl that they know they can come to when things in their lives are like burning down. Okay. Like Baker's comments indicate that the soldiers trusted in him, undoubtedly due to his character. So they knew Desmond was a good guy. He was a reliable guy because of how he conducted himself. So they wanted Desmond to be there for them when they went into battle and whatnot. So one thing about Desmond, though, that I thought about as somebody who reads the Bible a lot, he reminds me of the Rechabites. There's a passage in the Bible where God is commending a group of people called Rechabites, because this is what Desmond said, and I'm going to go into more in this second. Desmond said about how he felt during this whole time he was in the military, this whole experience. He said, I put my trust in God. I could never touch a weapon. I just kept praying. I felt like it was an insult to God to accept the protection of a weapon. My strength came from God. He enabled me to do what I did. You know, all of this reminds me of Jeremiah 35. Where the Lord, he honors a group of people who obeyed their ancestors in not dwelling in houses and not drinking wine. I'm going to read the passage for a second so you can see what I'm talking about here. It says in Jeremiah 35, and I'm going to skip some verses to get to the point. It says, so I went to see Jazaniah, the son of Jeremiah, and the grandson of Habazaniah, and all his brothers and sons representing all the Rechabite families. I set cups and jugs of wine before them and invited them to have a drink, but they refused. No, they said, we won't drink wine because our ancestor Jehonadab, son of Rechab, gave us this command. You and your descendants must never drink wine, and do not build houses or plant crops or vineyards, but always live in tents. If you follow these commands, you will live long, good lives in the land. So we have obeyed him in all these things. We have never had a drink of wine to this day, nor have our wives, our sons, and our daughters. We haven't built houses or owned vineyards or farms or planted crops. We have lived in tents and have fully obeyed all the commands of Jehonadab, our ancestor. Then the Lord gave this message to Jeremiah. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says. Go and say to the people in Judah and Jerusalem, come and learn a lesson about how to obey me. The Rechabites do not drink wine to this day, because their ancestor Jehonadab told them not to. But I have spoken to you again and again, and you refuse to obey me. Then Jeremiah turned to the Rechabites and said, this is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says. You have obeyed your ancestor Jehonadab in every respect, following all his instructions. Therefore, this is what the Lord of heaven armies, the God of Israel, says. Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, will always have descendants who serve me. Why did I read all of that? Well, one thing to understand is that God was commending these people for actually being consistent and being faithful to what their father or their ancestors were doing. And they felt that was honorable in and of itself and to God. And God honored them for it. In the same way, when it comes to Desmond and his life, I really believe that God honored him for the faith that he had of not touching a weapon. There's no sin in touching a weapon. You don't even have, it's not about the weapon. It's not there's nothing wrong with a gun. But for Desmond, he really felt in his heart he cannot touch a weapon, and he stood by that. And God honored him by keeping him alive and actually giving him the Medal of Honor. That's how I see his story being. And so to me, it's very appealing in that regard. Now there's some belief systems, and there's a belief system that I don't really agree with in a Seventh-day Adventist circle. But for Desmond and his life, I believe his story is unique because God sees his faith in all of this and how he's doing it for God. He's believing that God is being honored when he's actually keeping his end of the bargain, his word. Hacksaw Ridge, though. Let's talk about the movie itself. Now, every movie exaggerates things, right? And it's to grab an audience and, grab a profit and whatnot. I was curious to know what parts of the movie weren't true. So I asked ChatGPT what parts of Hacksaw Ridge were not accurate. And this is what it told me.
Hacksaw Ridge is largely faithful to the spirit of Desmond Doss's story. But like most historical films, it took creative liberties. Here are the key inaccuracies and dramatizations. Doss's court-martial threat was exaggerated. In the film, Doss is court-martialed and faces jail for refusing to carry a weapon. In reality, he was threatened with discharge and punished during training, but there was no formal court-martial. Military leadership misunderstood his rights, but didn't formally charge him. The timeline was condensed. In the film, his training and service all seemed to happen quickly. In reality, Doss served in Guam and Leyte, Philippines, before Okinawa. His heroism wasn't limited to Hacksaw Ridge. His relationship with Dorothy was altered. In the film, they meet in a hospital after he saves a man's life. In reality, they met at church in 1942 and corresponded before marrying in 1942. Well before his combat service. His sergeant's attitude shift was simplified. In the film, Sergeant Howell is extremely antagonistic until a sudden change of heart. In reality, Doss faced bullying from multiple sources, but his relationship with superiors evolved more gradually. What was accurate? His refusal to carry a weapon. His rescue of 75 men at Hacksaw Ridge, his unarmed courage under heavy fire, the grenade injury and broken arm, and his devotion to faith and Sabbath keeping.
Now, it makes sense to me why he wasn't court-martialed, since that would, first of all, bring a bad image on the U.S. Army. I can imagine, the headline of of the newspaper being, man discharged from army because of religious beliefs, you know. But secondly, besides the fact that he enlisted on his own free will, Doss was still willing to go into battle. He didn't like to be called an conscientious objector. He referred to himself as a conscientious cooperator. So, you know, it wouldn't make sense for him to get discharged if his whole heart and mind is to actually be in the battle. I mean, why would you kick him out? So dishonorably discharging him and or putting him in jail would serve to punish good intentions. You know, he wasn't saying, I don't want to fight because I'm scared of a gun. I'm scared to fight. He signed up to fight. So obviously he's taking that seriously. You know, it wouldn't make sense for them to court-martial Desmond Doss. But most importantly, though, they couldn't really do it anyway because he was legally protected by the U.S. Selective Service Act of 1916 as a non-combatant. Therefore, they signed him as a medic without a weapon to protect himself, which again was unheard of. Because the medics had guns, they had weapons for themselves to protect themselves. They're getting fight, you know, they're in a firefight. Of course, they're there. They may not want to be shooting them, but they're focused on those around them that are hurt. But still, they're there to protect themselves. But not Desmond. Desmond wanted God to protect him alone. Interesting to note is that Desmond Doss actually received 2 bronze medals in the Philippines for valor in his service in Guam and Leyte. I tried to get more specifics regarding his feats there, but all I could really find was that he was frequently the last man to leave and rescue others from the battlefield. And this time there was no cliff that he lured the soldiers down. So he basically did the same thing he did at Hacksaw Ridge, but this time there's no cliff. So this is something he was doing for a while by that point. So people knew who he was, and which is very interesting. Dorothy, his wife, Dorothy, you can tell a man's character based on how his wife talks about him. And so here are some quotes that his wife actually said that I think bolster his case as the kind of humble and selfless man he actually was. She said about him, he was the most Christ-like man I ever met. He was kind, gentle, and never thought badly of anyone. And another one, he was not a big man, but what he had was the power of God behind him. And then finally, Desmond never thought of himself as a hero. He would always say, I just did what I had to do. You know, and that marks a good man when a person can be humble about what he's done. You know, the word says, let others praise you and not your own lips. So Devin didn't boast about his actions and how he did, you know, on the battlefield. He just was there to do what he had, do a job. And he got it done. And he had God on his back, which is what I see. Was Desmond Doss an honorable man? So let's look at the verdict of ChatGPT. Desmond Doss, was he an honorable man? This is what it said.
Desmond Doss was an extraordinarily honorable man, admired not only for his heroism, but for his unwavering moral conviction. As a devout Seventh-day Adventist, he refused to carry a weapon or take a life, believing deeply in the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." Yet he chose to serve in the military during World War II, risking his life not to take lives, but to save them. During the brutal Battle of Okinawa, he saved 75 wounded men under relentless enemy fire, completely unarmed. Even after being wounded by a grenade and suffering a shattered arm, he treated his own injuries and crawled hundreds of yards to safety, so others could be cared for first. Despite facing ridicule and abuse from fellow soldiers for his beliefs, Doss remained humble and forgiving. Those who once mocked him later called him the bravest man they had ever known. When awarded the Medal of Honor by President Truman, Doss simply said, "I was just doing my duty." He never sought recognition or fame, giving God credit for all he had done. Desmond Doss's life is a rare and powerful example of honor in its truest form, rooted in faith, humility, courage, and compassion.
Now, I found it interesting that the GPT verdict said that, yes, Desmond was an honorable man because of his faith, humility, courage, and compassion. Now, mind you, ChatGPT, all it is just an AI app that takes all of the information from the internet about a particular subject that I ask about and somehow puts it all together into a concise summary, and to explain where we can just read it in 1, 2, or maybe 3 paragraphs, right? So it seems to me that this reflects how most people feel about Desmond. The world feels about Desmond. Now, most of the world isn't Christian. Most of the world doesn't believe in Jesus, but this is what they said about him. He had faith. He was humble, he had courage and compassion, so therefore he was an honorable man. Now, these same traits are commended by God in the Bible. Now, one thing that really actually means that it's true when the word says that we are made in his image, because these things that we find honorable are the same things that God finds honorable in the word of God. Go figure. So, it's just, I just found that to be very interesting. Time for the last word.
The last word.
Now, for the record, I want to say this. I don't share the same beliefs as he had, okay, regarding his faith in Jesus Christ. And in fact, I kind of personally think that the SDA religion is somewhat cult-like. I don't want to expand on this because it's going to go on the rabbit trail. But nevertheless, I can't deny this. I can't deny that God had his hand of protection on Desmond. I mean, it's too much of a coincidence to not be God. And I know how God works, and like I said before, I liken his life to the Rechabites, that God respecting his belief system, because he believes that, because Desmond believes that it's he can't do that. He follows his convictions. I believe God honors that. God honors that. It can be for anything, people who don't want to carry a phone, or people who don't want to ride bikes. I'm just making stuff up, they may feel somehow sinful. So God respects those things to me. That's how I see it. But do I think he was an honorable man like everyone else? Yes, I do. I really feel he was an honorable man because he valued the lives of other people. His actions actually exemplify what Jesus said was the greatest love. And it was to lay down one's life for his friends. John 15:13. It says, there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. In this case, he even risked his own life for his enemies. Now, in the film, he kind of rescued some Japanese soldiers. That may not be accurate. No one knows. I'm sure it was dark. He probably just grabbed people, but he may have. But we don't really know for sure. One final story that people may not know. It's actually in the film, but it's kind of brief. Desmond, he carried a small little Bible with him, and one day he lost it on the battlefield. The picture I have here is the actual Bible that he actually carried. A few soldiers decided to go back and risk their lives to go find his Bible, and they actually found it and gave it to him. Now, to me, that was very powerful, because that just even shows you even more how much they respected Desmond, that they would go back to look for a book that they probably don't believe in and risk their life just so that Desmond can get his Bible. Unbelievable. So what say you, though? I'm going to leave the rest of the episode up to you to judge. What say you about Desmond Doss? Was he an honorable man? I would love to hear from you. You can email me your answer at restoredkingdom315@gmail.com. One thing about my number, it's not working anymore. The number it's a long story. It's just a long story, but I don't have a phone number to text anymore. However, I still have an X. I'm very active on X under Scott M. Phillips. You can find me there. So you can shoot me a post or whatever, or a message on there, and we can connect that way. Now, I'm thinking about making this my last episode for this podcast. Until God says otherwise. But I may start a new one soon. I may do a new one, but I'm going to be in prayer about that and see what God wants to do with that. But I don't want to leave without actually asking you to subscribe to my other podcast, Practical Discipleship. I changed the name to Practical Discipleship Podcast, and it's on Spotify, it's on Apple. I'm currently working on season 2, and I plan to release the first episode early October, God willing. Okay, and then this time we're going to talk about the foundations of the faith. We're going to get more in detail into that. I thank you guys for those who've been watching, those who've been following this podcast. I hope you liked every episode that I've put up, and I hope that you learn a lot like I have. And remember, the Bible is the ultimate source for wisdom and knowledge, not anything else, including ChatGPT. All right? God bless you guys, and thank you for watching.
Deep in my heart.
Put your work down deep in my heart. Let it light up my path in the dark. Pull me back when I'm going too far. No more trusting in what I could do. I'm just trusting in all that you are. Reach the finish line chasing the world. But you knew I was yours from the start. Tryna follow your plan for me.